Hello, and welcome to our third episode of Talks in Production by Launch Darkly. We're here to make you feel like an awesome technical speaker so you can get out there and give talks about the things that you care about. I'm Heidi Waterhouse, and I'm happy to be here with you. This webinar is about how you practice your talks and how you make them and yourself ready for presentation at a conference. So I've taken all the things that I've learned as a speaker over the years and put them into a few simple tips. This isn't a very long webinar, but I think it will really help you when you're preparing for your next talk. So the first question most people have is why practice? And there are a lot of people online who are respected conference speakers who will still tell you that they don't practice. But I think it gives you a lot of confidence and redundancy in your experience if you go ahead and give it a little effort and do some practice ahead of time so that if something goes wrong, you have time to figure it out and compensate. So here are some of the reasons that we practice. We practice to get better. And I don't want you to just go through something by rote and do it over and over again without evaluating how it's working out. When I say get better at something, it's a lot like developing code. You need to write it, and then you need to review how it went and what you want to change, and then you need to repeat it with changes, because there's no point in doing the same wrong thing as practice. You need to be iterating and improving. Another reason to practice is to refine your message. When you say something out loud, it makes it more real and it makes it easier to understand what you're saying and to catch overarching themes that you have and to really keep on top of what it is you're trying to convey to the audience. So when you're refining your message, you'll find out as you go through practice that there are some things that are working for you and some things that aren't. Relatedly, practicing also gives you a chance to find your problems in your talk. I almost always, when I'm practicing a talk, find something that I've left out that I thought was intuitive, but when I start talking out loud, I realize that it's missing and I need to do something about it. So practicing gives you a chance to catch those logic errors or other problems without having to do it in front of an audience, because what you really want your audience to be focusing on is the message that you're trying to convey and not where they're confused by your presentation. A great reason to practice is to reduce your fear. When I started speaking, I was super nervous, like hands shaking, my knees almost wouldn't hold me up, my throat was all dry. And I thought it was maybe always going to be like that. But it turns out that as you do this more often, it's something that you know and anticipate and not something that you have to be as scared of. I'm not saying I never get a charge out of it and I'm never nervous, but it's certainly down to a manageable level. And I think it's a lot like recording yourself. I watch all the recordings I can of myself talking, and I really, really hate it. And I hate listening to myself on these webinars because I always feel like it's somebody else talking and I should have done a better job. That's a totally normal reaction. But I've done a lot of talking to podcasters, and it turns out that the ones who edit their own stuff and who listen to their things over and over again essentially burn out their hatred of listening to themselves talk. And when they said that, I realized that was what was happening to me when I was doing my own self-reviews and watching through these things, is that I'm just burning out the reactions and dulling down those emotional responses to the point where I can actually learn and teach myself from things that I've gone through. So when I say practice, I want to say only some kinds of practice help, and let's talk about some of the ways that you want to practice. First, I suggest practicing alone. Put your slide deck together, we discussed that in the second webinar, and then just talk through your slides. And I call this the mumble through, and I will frequently go back and do this like at the conference right before I give a talk. But what I want to do is remind myself of the flow of the talk and understand the overarching themes and make sure that the slides that I think are there because I present the same talk in a lot of different varieties and formats. So I want to make sure it's tuned appropriately for an audience. So this whole mumble through is just a familiarization to get you used to and ready to go on to the next steps. Then you need to do a recorded talk. And I really hate this, I already told you that, but it's really important because it gives you a chance to understand where you're rushing things or where you need to slow down. And it gives you a way to understand what you sound like, and it lets you have that step back to give you a little more abstract understanding of what you're doing. In the moment, especially if you're giving a talk in front of an audience, you have a lot of adrenaline going and it's difficult to remember what is happening. So if you can watch a recorded talk quietly, alone, not in the moment, it's going to give you a lot more information than trying to remember how a talk went. So when you're practicing a talk, I suggest that you go ahead and record your practice notes and see how it sounds to you and what it is that you want to change. Give your talk in front of a friendly audience. This doesn't have to be anybody who knows about the topic or who is going to give you a critique. You just have to do it in front of somebody who likes you. And if you totally don't have somebody to do that with in person or over a webinar, line up some stuffed animals or some pets or whatever it is you have, stand up and give them your talk and get through the feeling of talking to an audience for the first time, because it's really intimidating the first few times you stand up in front of someone and assert that you are an authority in this and you have the right to give a talk. So I really encourage people who are especially new speakers to do a friendly audience talk and feel comfortable talking in front of someone who isn't going to critique you. And the next step after that is to pick somebody who understands either public speaking or your topic, or ideally both, who are going to help you get the suck out. I practice with a partner, and she frequently tells me where it is I've lost the plot of my talk, or what I'm doing wrong, or how I've skipped over something that's important to understanding. And it is difficult for me to hear that because I like to believe that my talks are perfect the first time I write them, but I really have to get the suck out. And all talks have a finite amount of suck in them, and you can either get those out in front of the big audience or you can get them out in front of somebody who likes you. And I really suggest option B for that. So when you're picking your critique audience, I think it's important to pick somebody who is on your side, but still going to tell you when you're screwing something up. And frequently coworkers are helpful for this if there's somebody you trust, but I wouldn't do this with somebody you don't trust because then you're going to be super extra nervous. So what to practice? I don't want you to read your talk off your speaker notes. And I don't want you to feel like you have to entirely memorize something word for word. I think the best combination is when you know your talk well enough to give it without speaker notes, but you still have speaker notes so you remember all the points that you want to make. So here's what to practice. First, read through, which is, like I said, just a way to go through all the slides, make sure they make sense, make sure they're internally consistent. Just talk along until you feel comfortable with the flow of the talk, until you have an idea of what's coming next. It's sort of like an album that you listen to all the time, and at the end of one song, you just have an instinctive feel about what's happening next, to the point where when you hear that song on the radio and the next song isn't what you expect, you have a weird moment of confusion where you're like, that's not next. I want you to have that level of comfort with your content. After you get the read through down pretty well, you're going to need to start timing yourself, because that's how you figure out if you need to add or subtract content. And in the second webinar, I talked about how sometimes you have different timing when it comes to whether you're in front of an audience or not, but you need to have your timing dialed in to plus or minus 10 minutes, because any divergence longer than that, you're either shorting the audience or you're running into someone else's time, which is super rude. If you have to pick one, you always want to go short, but really and ideally, you should be going to exactly the time that conference organizers have given you. And that's really difficult. So the thing that you're going to need to practice here is how much content you want to have in. And one of my tricks for that is to do a pyramid information structure, which I learned when I was doing journalism. And what you want to do is within every main point, you put the most important stuff at the top and you put less important stuff sort of down at the bottom. So if you're feeling like you need to speed up a talk, you can cut out like the bottom 2 parts of every point, or if you're needing to extend a talk, you can go ahead and put those in, but you've already pre-planned how to change the length of your comment or length of your content so that it fits into the space you have available and how long it's actually taking you to perform this. The other advantage of pyramid information structure is that it makes it really easy to adjust the talk later for different time lengths and give different length talks from essentially the same slide deck. The next thing I want you to practice is standing up. You can have your notes, but there is something about how you practice that transfers to how it is you perform. And if you only practice sitting down, then it's going to be more difficult to remember what you're doing when you're standing up. I think this is the thing that we pretended in college, where if you studied drunk and then you got drunk before your final, it was supposed to help you because you'd be in the same state of mind. I'm not sure that actually helps you, but I am pretty sure that standing up and reading your notes gives you more of a physical memory about how things are supposed to go. So actually do it. Stand up. If you have a standing desk, you can use that. If you have a slide clicker, I really advise you use that instead of the keyboard because it gives you a little more room to move around. The next thing is the practice that we do for disasters. I would love to tell you that your AV is always going to work and nothing's ever going to go wrong, but I give a lot of talks and every once in a while something goes wrong and there's some reason that I can't have my speaker notes. So rather than be completely flummoxed when it happens to you on stage, I want you to get comfortable with your material and then turn off your speaker notes and just go through the slides and say as much as you can remember that goes with the slides. And if it turns out you don't remember the cue for a slide, you're going to be able to go back and fill that in and rememorize it. But I assure you that even if you never have an AV outage that causes you to lose notes, you'll feel more comfortable giving the talk and walking away from the podium and being in mastery of the topic if you can do this whole talk without notes. So other preparations that you need to do for a talk are a lot of sort of like physical things. We've talked a lot about practice, which is a mental thing, but let's talk a little bit about other things you need to know. You're almost always going to have to use an adapter. And I suggest if you're going to speak at more than 2 conferences, it's worthwhile for you to buy your own adapter for your computer or whatever you present from. I present from an iPad and I have a Lightning to HDMI and Lightning to VGA adapter that's very useful to me. And it goes in the case with my Bluetooth clicker because of course with an iPad, if you plug something into the Lightning port, that port is occupied and you can't have a clicker attachment. So this is my tool chain. It works 95% of the time and I consider that acceptable solidity. It turns out that the very newest generation of MacBooks with the USB-C are frequently a little fussy about their adapters and also HDMI. So before you totally count on taking your new MacBook to present from, make sure that it's going to work in that particular venue. And the way you can work around this, because of course, what are you going to do if you get to the venue and your computer doesn't work, is make sure that your presentation is 100% online. PowerPoint doesn't have very good speaker notes, but I use Google Slides, and Keynote also does attached attached speaker notes. So you can put either of those online and access it from someone else's computer. And that's going to give you a lot of confidence in your ability to switch systems on the fly and not be fumbling with adapters. Also, frequently, the conference will tell you what kind of plug that they're expecting. At this point, it's almost always HDMI, but every once in a while, someone will write and say, hey, we're working at a college or something, and it's all VGA. So know ahead of time, and then practice setting up your system and casting to projection. The other thing that I've seen people have trouble with is Linux computers are sometimes a little fussy about projectors. And so if you are presenting from a Linux system, I really strongly urge you to make sure that your presentation is also available online. Screen size. Your conference organizer should write to tell you what your screen ratio is, really. Almost always 16:9, but sometimes 4:3. And you want to make sure that your slides match that, because it looks regrettably amateur if you have slides that are either cut off or squished up in the screen. So you want to make sure that you're tuning your presentation to the place that you'll be projecting it. The next question is room size. And it's a big difference to presentation, how big your room is and how many people are in it. And I really prefer to know if I'm going to be talking to an intimate room of 20 people or a large room of 200 people or a plenary session of the whole conference. That changes how I practice and how much I practice. And it also changes how I construct my slides. Like, I always want the fonts to be big, but sometimes if I know that the back of the room is like 600 feet away, that's a big room, and it's going to have to be giant, and I can't have anything that depends on details or small fonts. So it's nice to be able to ask the organizer roughly what kind of room size they're expecting. Clothes. I'm a woman speaker, and that means that I have thought a lot about this, and in fact, I've written a whole blog post about like women's speaker clothes. The most important thing for both men and women to remember is that most conferences, especially if they're recording you, are going to have what they call a lavalier mic. And that's the one that clips onto your collar and has a cord down to a pocket pack that's a little smaller than a cell phone. And that needs to be able to clip or hang on something. It weighs maybe as much as half a pound. It's got pretty heavy batteries in it. And so you can't just hang it off an elastic waistband necessarily. You really need to have something sturdy to hold it up, something firm. So I sew all of my own conference dresses so that I am confident that there's a pocket for the mic pack and a collar relatively close to my face for the mic to clip to. And that gives me the confidence to go in knowing that whatever kind of microphone it turns out they have, I'm going to be able to accommodate it and not have to do something weird. Like somebody, I talked to somebody who's like, yeah, I wear shorts under my dresses and then I go to the bathroom and clip it into the waistband of my shorts. And I'm like, well, that seems super awkward. So no sweater dresses. That's really the important thing to remember. You want to wear something that makes you feel poised. And that means whatever it is that you feel like you want to get on stage in. And lots of speakers do fine getting on stage in jeans and a company t-shirt and a hoodie. And they feel good like that, and they feel confident, and they're not worried about their clothes, and more power to them. I like to dress up a little bit because it makes me feel more authoritative. And it gives me a makes me easier to find in a crowd, like, oh, she's wearing a bright colored dress. But that's my personal style. So it may not be your personal style. Pick whatever makes you feel comfortable, because if you're fussing with your clothes or tugging at them or otherwise sort of displaying discomfort with them, people will pick up on that and they will feel uncomfortable for you. And that's not the feeling that you want to give people when you're trying to give them technical information. So pick something that's comfortable for you, that you can wear easily. You're going to be wearing it all day. You're probably just going to go to the party in it. So whatever it is, pick something that works for you. Oh, also on the topic of clothes, makeup. Women are taught to put on makeup as a part of professional grooming frequently. But even if you're a man, I suggest you look at yourself on a recording and decide if you want to do something like enhance how dark your eyebrows are, or whatever it is that you're doing that indicates emotion, because it's very difficult to read facial expressions on especially blondish white people. We just sort of get washed out by cameras. And I want you to consider like what it is you want people to be able to see about your facial expressions, because there is no shame in stage makeup, no matter what gender you are. Social media. I have a social media team that takes care of this for me, which is an incredible luxury. But here are some things that you want to make sure happen around your talk. Before your talk, queue up using Buffer or some other thing, social media posts that say, hey, I'm going to this conference, I'm going to speak about this, are you coming with me? That's like a month to a week out. And then you're be like, my talk is at this time in this room. And then you want ones that are like, my talk is in an hour. And then you want to have one queued that's like, thanks for coming to my talk. If you missed it, here's the slides. And if you have that all queued up beforehand, that's really going to save you a lot of time and effort, because queuing those all up is, the matter of an hour, whereas trying to remember to do them when you're in the middle of a conference and worrying about giving a talk is an entirely different problem. Make sure that all of your devices are silenced during the talk. My iPad has a great feature where if I'm casting to present, it turns off all of my notifications so I don't get any pop-ups or calls. But you want to make sure that you've turned off every single possible pop-up. And you want to make sure your phone is off, because if people are tweeting about you or mentioning you or emailing you for information, you don't want your phone going off in your pocket and distracting you. So make sure that whatever you have on you is not going to push any alerts during your talk. And then after your talk, I frequently go sit down someplace quiet like the speaker's lounge and spend a little time looking over the social media reactions and retweeting them right away. Bridget Cromhut has a really great post on the social media things that you should do after you give a talk, like posting the slides and responding to questions. I used to do Storify, but Storify is closing down, so that's regrettable for me. I don't know what I'm going to use to replace that. And so take a little time after your talk to sort of come down from the adrenaline high of talking to people and go look at your social media, unless it's distressing, in which case you should get a buddy to look at your social media for you and help you mitigate that. The last hour before your talk, here are some things that I like to do. I really like going to the whole conference, so I will frequently even go to the talk before mine. But I think if you're a new speaker, you might want to consider taking the hour before your talk to sort of go be quiet and chill. You want to drink some water. It's fine to drink water on stage, but it's more useful to keep your throat lubricated and keep you from getting scratchy if you are well hydrated before you get up there. Give yourself a break from talking to anyone. Give yourself a little time to focus. If you're a yoga person, this is a great time to just do a few minutes of mindful breathing and thoughtful movement and stretching. Or if you're a looking at the sky person, step outside of the conference center, look up at the sky, sit on a bench, Do something quiet to get yourself centered and calm, because if you're rushing when you go up on the stage, you're going to feel like you're rushed through the whole talk. And then remember that it's going to be okay. Nobody comes to technical conference talks to like waste their time. They don't want you to fail. Like, the number of people who are hate watching is very small. So mostly the people in the audience are there because they want to hear what you have to say, and you made it sound interesting in your proposal, and they're hoping you give them good content. So they're on your side. When you look out at them, don't imagine them naked. Imagine them silently cheering for you and hoping that you're going to give them something really cool to think about. It's going to be okay. Another thing that you need to think about is whether you're going to do questions and answers. Some conferences explicitly discourage this and say question and answers are during the changeover time, like down in front of stage, which I really like, because very seldom are questions applicable to the whole audience. They're almost always like, in my weird use case, how would this work? So I really like, if I have a choice, to take questions one-on-one instead of having somebody say it in front of the whole audience. But there are some conferences that find value in whole audience questions. If it's a big room, I hope that they have a mic for the questions. If they don't have a mic, you really need to repeat the question, otherwise it won't be on the recording, because somebody mumbling 40 feet away from your mic is just not going to make it. So get in the habit, even if they do have a mic, of repeating and restating the question, just like your fourth grade teacher taught you to do. And then go ahead and answer it if you can. If you can't, it is okay. It is super okay to say, I don't know, let me look that up for you. Because it is much better to be honest about the things that you don't know than to seem like you're being arrogant and trying to blow people off by giving them the wrong answer. So I really encourage you to get comfortable with, perhaps even practice saying, I don't know how that works, let me get back to you. I think that Q&A is different depending on your sort of status in society, and that if you are a person who is uncomfortable with it, even if the conference sort of wants it, you can push back and say, I'm not going to do it. I'm only doing this presentation. For example, I have a talk that's about whistleblowing, and I absolutely refuse to do a Q&A with it because people are really emotionally invested and they want to tell me their stories, which is fine, but I'm terrified that someone who shouldn't hear their story will hear it. And so I'm like, I will not do a Q&A for this. It will only be one-on-one. And once I explain that to conference organizers, they've been super good about accommodating that. So finally, I want to say that I'm really proud of you for coming through this series with me. And I hope that you've gotten a bunch of good ideas for how to pitch. And I want to encourage you to contact me anytime that it's useful for you. You can find me at Wired Ferret online or Heidi at LaunchDarkly, and I will try and get back to you with answers to any of your particular questions. And also encouraging, hand-holding, conference proposal reading, bio writing, whatever it is that you need help with. That's one of the things that LaunchDarkly really believes in, is that everybody has a story to tell, and we want to help you do that. So thank you again for your time, and I hope that you have a great time speaking.